first group going today is Dr. Nowatka's thesis group. This is stress coping and personality as predictors of depression. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Resharia Keller.
I'm Chloe Wanink.
I'm Kendall Hinson.
I'm Carter Bunn.
I'm Sarah Grace Lindsey.
I'm Rhiannon Lemaster.
And collectively we established that the purpose of our study was to examine stress, coping, and personality as potential predictors of depression. Stress is the body's reaction to any change that requires an adjustment or response. The body reacts to these changes with physical, mental, and emotional responses. So when we sense danger, real or imaginary, the body's defenses kick in, triggering the fight or flight response, also known as the stress response. Although some stress is normal and essential for survival, chronic stress, or stress which persists consistently over time, is scientifically linked to various health conditions, including depression. Previous literature often correlates stress and depressive symptoms with high levels of stress predicting depression. College students are also really vulnerable to stressors, including academic difficulties, financial strain, and personal stress. In fact, the American College Health Association's 2014 findings reported that 43.7% of college students experience significant stress and 11% of college students experience tremendous stress. Additionally, research conducted with college students suggests that stress is a significant predictor of depression and suicidal ideation. College students experiencing high levels of stress, whether social, personal, academic, or financial, may experience feelings of helplessness and lack the ability to resolve their stressors independently, leading to poor quality of life and low mood. These issues in turn contribute to the prevalence and intensity of additional depressive symptoms. For the purpose of our study, we established stress as a significant predictor of depression based on positive correlations reported in previous literature.
Okay, so there are three types of coping: problem-focused coping, active emotional coping, and avoidant emotional coping. So problem-focused coping is when you attempt to alter a problematic situation. This would include taking action or planning. And based on past research, researchers suggest that this often leads to more positive results regarding better overall health and lower levels of depression. Active emotional coping is when one tries to manage their emotional responses to a problematic situation. So this would include altering one's expectations and expressing emotions. And then avoidant emotional coping is when one just tries to avoid a problematic situation, so just ignoring or not addressing the problem at hand. And based on past literature, researchers suggest that this often leads to more negative results, so higher levels of depression and worse overall health.
We also wanted to examine personality in relation to depression. We used these 4 personality factors in our study. Neuroticism is essentially equivalent to emotional instability. Highly neurotic individuals tend to be withdrawn, tense, and anxious. Previous studies have shown that highly neurotic individuals positively correlate with depression. Conscientiousness refers to an individual's sense of responsibility and duty, as well as foresight. Those who have low conscientiousness, or those who are disorganized, careless, and unreliable, are suggested to be vulnerable to depression. Openness to experience is the tendency to appreciate new art, ideas, and values. A previous study indicated that openness positively correlates with self-reported scores of depression. Agreeableness is indicated in sympathetic and kind behaviors. Previous research suggests a relationship between low agreeableness and higher scores of depression and higher rates of statewide suicides. The figure depicted here refers to each individual variable and how they relate and predict depression. According to previous research, we have hypothesized that higher stress will lead to greater predictability for depression. We have also hypothesized that the personality factors consisting of high neuroticism, high openness, low conscientiousness, and low agreeableness will also lead to greater predictability for depression. And lastly, we have predicted that those who have high avoidant emotion coping, low problem-focused emotion coping, low less emotion-focused coping and less problem-focused coping styles will lead to a greater predictability for depression. So because we looked at each individual variable separately and how they relate to depression, we thought it would be interesting to look at all of these variables combined and see how they interplay with each other to predict depression as well. Previous literature suggests personality is to be a contributing factor to stress. These results showed that neuroticism appeared to be a predisposing factor for depression as well as stress in all the participants. The results of a study conducted with individuals entering a treatment for depression revealed that the use of coping responses only moderately related to stress. However, they did find that more ongoing stress, opposed to more negative daily events, such as getting a bad grade or a parking ticket, may be a predictive factor for depression. Personality may affect which coping style one uses. According to a past study, those who have high neuroticism tend to use avoidant emotion-focused coping. Those who have high levels of agreeableness tend to use positive emotion-focused coping, but not the avoidant forms. They've also found that those with higher levels of conscientiousness reported high use of problem-focused coping, and they did not find any evidence for openness in relation to coping styles. So this leads us to our fourth hypothesis, which is a combination of all of these global variables combined to predict depression. We've hypothesized that when these variables are interplaying with each other, it will lead to a greater level of depression among Wofford students.
So to begin our research, we had 500 student emails randomly selected to receive our survey. Of the 500, we had 165 respondents. 15 did not fully complete the survey, leaving us with 150 total participants. The 150 participants completed 4 online surveys. The perceived stress scale, the mini international personality item pool, the situational brief cope scale, and the Center of Epidemiological Studies depression scale. After IRB approved it, the survey was sent out through IT. To analyze our first 3 hypotheses, we used correlation. So as you can see here, stress, avoidant emotional coping, neuroticism, and conscientiousness were all significantly correlated with depression. Unfortunately, problem-focused coping, active emotional coping, openness, and agreeableness were not significantly correlated with depression. To analyze our fourth hypothesis, we used multiple regression. Multiple regression is used when researchers want to predict the value of one variable based on the value of 2 or more other variables. Multiple regression is not a causation, but rather a mathematical prediction. Our prediction was that the predictors would work together, but also work alone. So our predictors were stress, personality, and coping, and so we predicted they would work alone, but also all work together.
So after we ran the multiple regression, results indicated that first, our hypothesis was supported in the fact that there was an overall good fit of the model. In other words, the combined relationship between stress, coping, and personality was indicative of depression. However, high stress and avoidant emotional coping were the only 2 predictors of depression. Our hypothesis was not supported in the fact that problem-focused coping, active emotional coping, and all personality factors were not significant predictors of depression. So the diagram here best illustrates our findings. As you can see, stress combined with avoidant emotional coping were the best predictors of depression.
As previously mentioned, our model was an overall good fit. However, avoidant emotional coping and stress were the only significant mathematical predictors for depression. And we believe this is because scores on the avoidant emotional coping scales and the stress scales were so high that they overtook possible predictor relationships with personality factors and other coping mechanisms. There was also some correlation between neuroticism and conscientiousness with depression, as well as a positive correlation between problem-focused coping and active emotional coping. So our model was overall successful. Some limitations of this survey were the length of the survey. We used 4 scales in their entirety instead of creating our own questions. So there were about 80 questions to answer, and 15 people did not complete the survey, so one of our limitations was simply that the survey was too long. Another issue we have is that Wofford College is not a very diverse campus, and our sample was not very diverse. So while our results are in keeping with previous studies done at Wofford and have the same level of severely depressed people, which is about 43%, we don't think these could be generalized to other colleges or college students in general. One suggestion we have about the issue of depression on campus is that we have greater access to counseling services. Currently, we only have 3 counselors, and they're often overbooked, so we think that the very high levels of depression on campus could definitely be aided by this suggestion.
So some future implications were to also measure positive adjustment along with depression, to limit the amount of variables measured. So because we used personality factors and multiple coping strategies, maybe narrowing our focus in the future would be helpful, and then, as mentioned, seeking a more diverse sample.
And going off of that, we also believe multicollinearity could have been a problem because several of our independent variables were actually independent of each other. They weren't independent of each other. So in the future, we'll test for multicollinearity, eliminate the independent variables, and then hopefully our reliability will be a little better.
We'd like to say thank you to our wonderful thesis advisor, Dr. Nowatka, the psychology department for all of their support, Katarina Barnhart in IT, and everyone who participated in our survey.
We'll take questions.
What in the literature had y'all predict that the openness personality trait would correspond to higher levels of depression?
I mean, what about openness?
Correct.
I would have to look back at the literature and email that to you. That's something you would be interested in.
We did think it was interesting that openness and agreeableness were positively correlated with each other. So although they weren't significant, that's just an interesting factor. So I think future research would be helpful.
I'm curious the proportion of male-female respondents, and if you thought about looking at anything between.
We can get the numbers for you. So
Give me like 2 seconds. We had about 34% of the sample being male and 64% being female, so there wasn't really an equal amount.
And as we know, sometimes females are more depressed than males, like past research has shown. So in the future, that'd be interesting. We did have a lot of depressed individuals, so in the future, getting an equal amount of gender could be interesting.
Hi, I have a question. In looking at your stressors, what you indicate stressors, some people, those things actually energize them and would not cause depression, and then others do. And they develop different coping techniques for that. Some people you see develop successful coping techniques on their own, and others do not. How does that happen? What are the factors that contribute to people not being self-aware and that get away with it, that they go to seek help rather than just become depressed?
Well, there are individual differences, of course. Happily, there was a sample of 150, so we're closing in on a tenth of the Wofford population. So some of that will have gotten wiped out, having had so many participants. So we weren't predicting, they weren't predicting individual aspects, but for the group as a whole.
As a generalization.
Right. So past literature just tells us the average. So in this case, avoidant emotional coping is averagely associated with less depression, and that's equal to all the other personalities and high levels of stress. It's just an average.
Okay, one more and then we'll.
When you guys took the survey data, did you do anything to help train participants on how to answer the questions, because I can imagine when someone might report as a 6 or 7, someone else might report as a 9. And maybe as a follow-up to that, did you do anything in your analysis to control for variability in response?
That's a good question. Yeah, we did not, and in the future, we could definitely do that, because all we did was send out the email, and they read it themselves and answered.
Was there an example
It had
of,
scales.
was there any example of, before they started answering the questions of maybe like how someone might respond in a
Yeah,
situation?
like 0 would be, in some cases, never, and then a 5 would be always or nearly every day for 2 weeks. Is that what you're looking for?
It was more based on the frequency that they had the thoughts that we described.
Okay, thank you so much.